From the Institute for Research on Public Policy, this is Demystifying Community Housing, a special series from the Policy Options podcast in collaboration with Community Housing Canada. I'm your host, Ricardo. Last episode, we talked about what community housing is and why it's important. In this episode, we'll hear from 3 people about what it's like to actually live in community housing. We'll also talk to nonprofit housing practitioners about the challenges of operating community housing and supporting the well-being of their tenants. SFU Professor Yushu Ju facilitated some of the conversations you're about to hear. So did student researchers Pokmentong and Quavo. We held these conversations on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in Vancouver, as well as the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation in Montreal and the Anishinaabe Algonquin people in Ottawa. But before we get into today's conversation, let's get to know our guest a little bit. AnaLori Smith works in the public sector in Ottawa as a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional. She has a physical disability, which means that her home must be accessible.
Hello, my name is AnaLori Smith, and my pronouns are she and her, and I live on Argyle Avenue in Centertown, Ottawa, and I've lived as a tenant with Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation for the past 8 years. It's been a while. Yeah, so I've been there. And I'm very happy. I live in a 1-bedroom, fully accessible apartment.
Our next guest is Pam Gill. She's a retired social worker who's dealing with the challenges of having physical disabilities and severe health issues. She lives independently in social housing in Vancouver.
Well, we've been in Canada for 68 years. I came with the family. The whole family came here. My father was in the Canadian Army. I went to UBC as a younger person first I got 2 degrees, BSc and BSW. And then I went for fine arts degree. It's still pending. My master's is pending. I have worked in the research department in Department of Anatomy at UBC, and I used electron microscope and electron scanning microscope and atomic units and all that kind of thing. And I also worked when I retired from UBC. I went to Ontario. I was offered a human rights commissioner job with the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and then my health got really bad, so I came back here.
Rita Wong, our third resident guest, is a retired senior who currently operates a food bank in partnership with different neighborhood organizations. She lives in a subsidized housing unit in Vancouver.
I came here as a foreign student in 1975. So from 1976 to 1977, I was a SFU student for about a year, and then I dropped out. And then I at that time, I don't feel like in school. I don't want to be a student anymore. So I started looking for jobs, and I work for 2 industries. One is food industry for a few years, and then banking industry for maybe more than 25 years. So my last job was retired in TD Bank. So I deal with people all the time because my job is customer service. So I'm a people person. I can just deal with many kinds of situation, difficult or easy or something like that.
We also have 2 guests who work at the forefront of the community housing sector. Marika is the policy director at the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, and William Azaroff is the CEO of the Brightside Community Home Foundation based in Vancouver.
I'm Marika. I'm the policy director at the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. And I've been with the association for almost 6 years now. And previously to this position, I was the executive director of the Community Social Planning Council of Greater Victoria. And the Social Planning Council, the history of social planning councils was that they began during the Great Depression in order to address issues like poverty, of housing affordability and food security back in the 30s. And so we continued to do that work, looking at poverty reduction and community development initiatives.
I'm William Azaroff. I'm CEO of an organization called Brightside Community Homes Foundation, which is a not-for-profit housing provider in Vancouver. We have 22 properties, all in the city of Vancouver, plus 4 more properties currently undergoing redevelopment to provide a bunch of new homes to the people who need those homes. We can get into that. I'm also the board chair of the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. So I'm on the board, volunteer board of directors on that organization. My career trajectory is an odd one. I started off as a filmmaker, got involved with digital production, and was lucky enough to work at Van City, where I got a stretch opportunity to move into the community investment team and grew to be an executive there. And after several years as an executive, in 2019, moved over and became the CEO of Brightside Community Homes Foundation.
In the winter of 2023, SFU researchers visited Pam and Rita at home and had conversations with them there. The conversations we had with the other speakers took place online. Our 3 resident guests all live in nonprofit housing projects. They're all located close to public transport, but they vary in terms of the age and design of the buildings and the demographic groups they serve. AnaLori lives in Beaver Barrack Community Housing in downtown Ottawa. It used to be a military barrack and was redeveloped in 2012. The buildings are 5 to 8 stories tall and have accessibility features, such as an elevator and wheelchair access. They include 254 mixed-rate units for singles, couples, families, and seniors. 25 units are wheelchair accessible. AnaLori lives in a 1-bedroom unit that costs $1,160 a month. Although this is a market-rate unit, its rent is still well below the average asking rent for a regular 1-bedroom unit in Ottawa, which is at $2,064. Here's AnaLori describing what her home is like.
So I think it's about a little under 600 square feet, so it's still not large. However, the way that's designed is it's all open concept. So it's literally one big room where you have the kitchen and the living room and the home office. But because you're in one large room, you don't feel claustrophobic at all. And I'm really lucky because I have a corner unit. So there's a big, enormous window on the set. So no matter where you are, there's lots of lighting. And you look out at the Museum of Nature, which is this gorgeous castle. So it's quite lovely. And then I have a 1-bedroom. And it's nice because it's not like enormous, but it's big enough for me to go in with my little walker and to enjoy that. And then my bathroom has a roll-in shower, which is so important because I find too is that as somebody with cerebral palsy, sometimes at the end of the day I just don't have the energy to walk like usual. So then I have that option of like just crawling into the shower, and it's safe, and I could do that because it's all flat. So I really appreciate that option. And then in my kitchen, I have an oven that opens up like a microwave. So instead of opening up like toward you, it opens up sideways, which makes it much easier to cook. So you don't feel as though you're afraid of dropping anything. Yeah. And underneath that oven, there's a little table that pulls out so you can rest whatever you cooked on that table. Like, it's very well designed.
Pam lives in a non-profit managed housing project in Vancouver. It's close to the city's light rapid transit system, called the SkyTrain. The building, completed more than 50 years ago, is 2 stories with a wood frame. It caters primarily to seniors and to the deaf or hard of hearing community. It contains 29 units, which are a mix of bachelors and 1-bedrooms. There's an amenity room, backyard community garden and patio, shared laundry, and storage lockers. There's no elevators for the second-floor units. Pam's rent is about $800 per month, and the building is not government subsidized. Here's what Pam had to say about her place.
There's a small bathroom with a tub and, the toilet and the sink. And then there's the kitchen to one side as you enter. And there's just room for your bedroom and your living room area. I would say it's about 400 square feet. I don't know. I'm not that familiar, but obviously it's close to that. It's near location.
Okay.
It's very close. Like, this is why I'm not moving actually, is because of SkyTrain, buses, 99, and all my doctors and my therapists are in general area. And I got to know the neighbors outside.
Rita lives alone in a 4-story building in East Vancouver that's managed by another nonprofit housing society. Built more than 60 years ago, it has 49 bachelor suites designed for independent seniors. Due to its age, the building is not fully equipped for people who have significant mobility challenges. However, the residents do enjoy a relatively high degree of freedom. Unlike the case in Pam's building, Rita and her neighbors are allowed to have pets and to smoke in their suites. Rita pays a monthly rent of $400, which is about 1/6 of the cost of the average rent for a typical Vancouver studio. Rita can walk to the nearest SkyTrain station in 2 minutes, or catch several buses nearby. Her home is a self-contained studio with a kitchen and a bathroom. The building has plenty of common areas, including a lounge, a yard, and a garden. The residents use those spaces for activities such as barbecues, games, and group dinners. Rita showed our research team around when they visited.
Yeah, every tenant has a storage. You want to check storage? Everyone has a storage. And those are storage room. And because I do a lot of community thing, so they let me use this room, which has a freezer and 2 fridge. Because I need that to do my thing, my food bank. Not just that, I run some community events as well for other communities. So it has another public washroom.
As a result of the federal divestments since the 1990s, many community housing units are decades old and in substandard conditions. Across the country, over half of the community housing units were built more than 40 years ago. 1/3 of the buildings are between 20 and 40 years old, and only 13% of stocks were built within the past 20 years. The housing projects that Brightside Community Homes manages are a good example of this aging housing stock. William Azaroff, Brightside's CEO, explains the history of the organization, their housing portfolio, as well as the demographics they serve.
We've gone through all kinds of histories. When we were a senior serving organization only. And for the first, 30, I think, years, 20, 30 years of our existence, we were seniors housing. And then in the 90s, I believe, we expanded our model to include people with disabilities and families who have a low income. And so those are the 3 demographics we serve to this day. And we have been very strategic, I think, with our mission, vision, values. So those were redone shortly before I was hired, probably in 2015, 16. Today, our portfolio of the 22 sort of legacy buildings, the older buildings that aren't currently being redeveloped, most of them are 2 or 3 story walk-ups. They are, age from the 60s and the 70s mostly. So they're aging. They are all rent geared to income. So our residents today pay 30% of their income in rent, and their incomes range between $25,000 and $45,000 a year.
The 3 residents we spoke to each came to community housing by a different path during their various life transitions. But they all shared stories about how community housing has offered them an affordable and stable home. For Rita, it was divorce that prompted her move from a condo she owned to living with her children in social housing.
When I was still married, I got my own house, and then later on I got my own condo because I got divorced, right? So my asset would be shrunk from, for example, a rate from 1 to 10. I used to be 9 to 10, very good. And because of my divorce, it would go to maybe 7 only. So a lot of maybe bad decisions or whatever reason that is. So I decide, maybe I would rather rent because my rent is very cheap. Some friend told me, hey, why don't you try social housing? So I applied with my son. I wait for about 9 months, not too long. Then I moved to my first one in Fraser and 49. Very good maintained, very new. but I cannot live there because I'm single right now. I'm not living with my kids, right? I'm very lucky when let me see, about 2000, 23, 4 years ago. And then at that time, I was old enough to stay in a place like this because you have to be 55. At that time, I was 55 already. So very lucky, I surrendered the place for 3 years, and then I reapply again because I have good record. I keep my place very clean. Within a few weeks, I got this place. So I've been here 13 years. Very good thing. I'm so lucky again. This place has, I show you when we're going out, we have a nice garden that we can plant vegetables.
Similarly, Pam moved into her current housing when she left the graduate program at UBC in 2009. Her children offered that she could live with them, but she ultimately decided to live independently, out of respect for the personal space of her children's families.
I used to live at UBC student housing. We have it's called the Thunderbird housing. I had a beautiful stay there, beautiful room. All accommodation and everything was just clicked. But then I left my studies and I end up here. Before that, before I started my master's, I came from Ontario and lived with my daughter for a while. But I wanted some privacy of my own, and I didn't want to be seen as a burden. I know I'm getting old, and I would be losing some, performance and all that. So that's why I moved here. I used to live with my son. Okay. He had a nice house. At age 40, he retired, and he's very careful, very highly academic, highly this and that, and he's retired at age 40. And so he said, come live downstairs, and downstairs meant it was another beautiful place. But I also felt that he needed his privacy and I need my independence. So my daughter had twins, and then I came in to help her, and I end up staying with her. And then when I found that twins are taken care of, I need to move on my own. This is my journey. I've been here since 2009, and there have been good moments, there have been bad moments in this building. I mean, there's pros and cons of living in here.
Securing a spot in community housing, especially in subsidized housing, can be challenging due to high demand and long wait lists. The process of tenant selection and housing allocation vary across Canada and housing operators. While some units are allocated through a centralized system managed by housing authorities, such as the Housing Registry and BC, others are managed by individual housing operators. Factors like family status, care needs, and age all play a role in how long it takes to get a unit. Sometimes, personal connections and lucky timing can play a big role as well. Pam describes her search process.
I met the manager. He was walking in here. Okay. I went to Craigslist and I saw there's a vacancy, and I came right here. First I called their head office. Oh, I don't know, we'll apply next month or whatever. I said no. I walked over here. The manager was here, and I just went up to him. I said, I need a room. And he says, oh, we have a 1-suite open. I said, good, give it to me then.
In Ottawa, the average wait time for subsidized unit is 5 or more years. The wait time for a non-subsidized unit is not that much shorter. AnaLori waited 4 years to get into a below-market rent unit in Ottawa.
It took about 4 years because whenever I first moved here, there was nothing available. And because the quality of the housing is so good and the quality of our accessible units is very good, once people move in, they really don't move out. And the only reason why I knew about this unit is because the person who was in it, she wanted to move to a larger accessible unit. Otherwise, she was here for a good 10 years. And at the bare minimum, I could see myself being here for a good 10 years or more. Because now, for the most part, most for-profit landlords, they don't think about accessibility. Like, that's just not part of their niche.
Despite the long waits, the residents we spoke to still prefer community housing over private market rental. AnaLori explains her reasons.
Yeah, So this is my first apartment building. Before I moved in, I lived at home with my mom and dad. And yeah, and even whenever I was thinking about leaving, like moving out of my parents' place, I made sure to do my research, and I was very intentional about not moving in with a private landlord because I just didn't, even back then, even though that was quite a long time ago, I remember hearing about rent evictions, and I remember hearing about these astronomical rent increases that can happen annually. So I was wise enough, even at the time, to realize that's not a good move. Don't go there, and try to find something that's going to be sustainable long term, especially at a time where I didn't have a permanent job and I was a student.
For Pam, community housing was the only option that would allow her to live independently on her low income. We asked if social housing was her first choice.
Yeah, it was actually, because I wasted a lot of money on student fees and all that, and I give away. If you give me $100, they'll be gone by tomorrow. Not on me, but somebody else, and it's my fault. With all that academic qualifications, I should be making money, but I don't. I'm on SAFER.
SAFER stands for Shelter Aid for Elderly Renters. It's a rent assistance program in BC. The program is meant to help seniors on low to moderate income who are living in non-subsidized rental units, like Pam. Rita, another senior, told us how much she appreciates the long-term affordability of her home as well as minimal rent increases.
Every year they raise about $10. When I first came here, 300 something only. So because I've been here 13 years, so now 465, I think. Include heat, include hot water, include TV. TV, so many channels, extremely a lot of channels. I just pay for my internet and phone and hydro. Hydro is only $30 a month. And because I'm senior, Tenant has a deal for seniors called Internet for Good, $10 a month. Oh. I have that deal. My home phone, $5. So including tax, I pay only $18.
AnaLori lives in a below-market rent unit and pays a rent about 40% lower than the average market rate for a similar-sized unit in Ottawa. The difference between what she pays and market rent could be even larger given the private market's scarcity for accessible units that suits her needs.
So I'm really fortunate. I pay $1,160 a month for a little under 600 square feet, which is quite remarkable because I don't live in the boonies. I live in downtown Ottawa in prime real estate, and I live close to all of my social supports, and I live close to all of the amenities that I need in the neighborhood. So I'm really fortunate to be here.
Unlike the private market, where landlords often set the rent to maximize profits, in community housing, rent are determined either by tenants' income level or operational costs. In Canada, more than 90% of community housing units have rent that are either geared to income or based on break-even operational costs. This percentage is the lowest in BC at 66%, and then in Alberta at 85%. Only a small proportion, up to 13% across Canada, is rented at market rate. When non-profit housing operators charge market rents, they may reinvest the profits from those rents into maintaining their housing portfolio or use market rents to cross-subsidize their non-market housing. William explains how Brightside is able to provide its tenants with more affordable rents.
So our legacy stock is all rent geared to income, or when we have, so of our 22 buildings, 7 have agreements with BC Housing that allows us to get to what's called shelter rates. And the rest, we actually operate as deeply affordable housing because they're older buildings. We maintain them well, but nothing fancy. And those mortgages are often paid off. So we're able to maintain a level of affordability because they're older stock. In our new stock, it is pretty much impossible in today's market with all the regulations and the increase of costs and interest rates to build a building today that is 100% rent geared to income or deeply affordable. So every building will have a different percentage of units that are low end of market, still below market, but much closer to market and tied to the market. So if they're 15% below market, they will continue to move up with the market. And those are to cross subsidize to provide extra revenue to allow us to even be able to operate that building. So for the first time, starting in March, when the first of our new developments opens, March 2024, we will have a cluster of people paying low end of market. And so that will bring in much needed revenue in order for those buildings to be break even. So we're continuing that legacy of a healthy percentage of our buildings having operating agreements, which is helpful, but not all, which gives us a level of flexibility and independence.
Having affordable housing means more than just paying lower rents. For tenants, it's also about financial security and being able to afford more of life's essentials, as well as having a better quality of life and more opportunities. We asked AnaLori whether her current home ensures a level of financial security for her.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Living alone with a physical disability, it's quite expensive. Like, I know that for me, I pay for all of my additional help firsthand, and I pay for any repairs that I have on my adaptive devices. So it all kind of balances itself out. As somebody with a physical disability, when you live, or anybody, when you live with your parents, you're more like coddled. You don't really know what the real world is like. And then you get out. At first, it was a shock because I thought, oh my God, I'm responsible for all of my bills. And like, how did this bill not get paid for so many months? What happened? But over time, you gain all of the skills that you really need as an adult. Like, you gain financial literacy, how to budget properly. Um, Likewise, you become more resilient because you live alone, so you're not as dependent on other people. And I've learned to like how to how to depend on other services, but in a way that where I'm more in control. Like, I know that for me, I have a cleaning lady who I hired, and she comes every 2 weeks to clean my apartment. But I picked her. And I know that for the groceries, like, I get my groceries delivered every single time I do it. But once again, both of those items are directed by me. So you learn a lot of those skills about how to be, how to have assistance from others, but to be in control and in charge of how that gets um, implemented. So, yeah.
Stability is another crucial consideration for those in community housing. All three of the residents we spoke to have lived in their current homes for at least 8 to 10 years. This long-term occupancy reflects a wider trend that was identified in a UBC study on evictions across Canada. The study found that residents in community housing, including co-ops, are significantly less likely to face evictions compared to those in private market housing.
This is more secure. You know why? They only raise, $15, $10, $15 a year, affordable. But private one, they can jump to 100 to 150, so 50% increase and kick you out. Find excuse to kick you out. Oh, it happens all the time.
William, of Brightside, explains how the compassionate approach they take contributes to their tenants' stability and security.
So if a resident is a day late in paying their rent, we can issue them a 10-day notice to evict. And they have 10 days to pay their rent, but if they don't, we can evict them. That is the letter of the law. But we would never do that. Obviously, people can't live rent free, but we try and take a compassionate approach to what is going on with that resident. Again, some residents are very open to that. They're apologetic. They work with us. They play their role because it is a two-way street. Some residents don't, and that creates issues. But most people are reasonable. So we just try and take, like, Our philosophy is keeping people housed. If that is our philosophy, then every interaction with a resident, it's about what's going on with every difficult interaction. There's lots of lovely interactions that this doesn't come up, but every challenging, when we are redeveloping a building and we have to go in and say, look, your building is end of life. You're all going to need to move and we're going to redevelop this building. We are a large enough organization that you can all stay within the Brightside portfolio. Your rent is going to stay the same. We're going to give you an honorarium as because of the inconvenience higher than what's mandated by the city of Vancouver. We're going to pay for your move. And and if you move to another Brightside unit, if you don't have another move in you, you can stay put and that can become your forever home. And when the building's done, at that point, you can look at that new building and choose. You can come back into a brand new building, pay the same amount, we'll pay for your move, or you can stay put. And many residents say, like, I just don't have another move in me. And some residents are like, I can't wait to get into a brand new building. But our goal is to keep people housed. So unlike a private landlord who might be looking to get people out so they could jack up the rents, we're not looking to do that. We just know that with the age of our buildings and the need for housing, it's not like the building is naturally empty, it's full, and yet we still have to redevelop it. So we put a lot of thought. We built an in-house resident relocation team. We take a maximalist approach. In other words, what is the city mandated and how do we go beyond that? It's how do we keep people optimally housed rather than how do we make the most amount of money, let's say, or how do we get rid of this person because they're problematic? Lots of people become problematic at various points in their lives. How do we take an empathetic approach, but also have some boundaries?
On top of the financial benefits, many residents enjoy the social life and the supportive social environment of community housing. The 2021 Canada Housing Survey revealed that over half of community housing tenants felt a sense of belonging to their community. A 2020 survey of Brightside residents conducted by an SFU team revealed that half of the surveyed residents had participated in social activities organized by Brightside. And more than 3 out of 4 residents said they enjoyed those activities and eagerly anticipated the next one. Rita and AnaLori told us a bit about what they enjoyed about the social aspect of living in community housing.
Because I'm older, I still like more social life. Here, I do. I have at least one walking friend here. We walk together. That lady in the lobby, she's my new friend. She's going to be my walking friend later on. Yeah. Okay? So, yeah, and then also I have quite a few, 3 to 5 walking friends in this area. Okay? Yeah, so I'm good in many ways.
She continues to compare her current home with living in a private market rental.
This one, they can have some kind of social life. They can talk to the neighbors a little bit, right? Private, only yourself, who you do talk to, only the landlord, but they're not busy, they're not available all the time. Here, we have 48 people. Much better if a person is older and older, it's better to live this kind of environment. Much healthier, because I study sociology as well. Social life is huge in a person's life.
AnaLori told us that she cherishes the mutual support she gets from her neighbors.
So I have a really good relationship with my neighbors, especially so I live on the 4th floor. Well, everyone in the building is very nice, but it's really nice to have more close relationships with my neighbors on the 4th floor, because as someone with cerebral palsy, if I would ever fall or anything, I have their number if I would ever need help. Or there was one time where I needed to pick up stuff from the grocery store, but the elevator was down. So I asked my neighbor, I said, here's the receipt. Can you please pick up my order from Loblaws? And because he's able to go down the stairs, he was able to pick it up for me, and he was going to Loblaws anyway. So it's that type of neighbor relationship that makes me more confident as somebody with a disability living alone, and it makes you feel less vulnerable when you know that there's somebody, like multiple people, who can help you if you would ever need it in the building.
However, Pam and Rita felt that community housing operators could do more to foster a better social life by offering more community activities.
I think organize some sort of program, community events, barbecues and tea times, and I like it. I appreciate what goes on. You hear stories and you help each other, and psychologically you make new acquaintances. And we can get together, we can have music, we can have exercises, we can, this TV was broken down. Somebody stole our other TV, and we would watch hockey games, and people would come around here, and, that was really good.
Rita believed that housing operators could afford to organize more regular events, similar to those held before the pandemic. She said her building had not had any community events for 4 or 5 years. We asked what she thought the reasons for that were.
They do have the money. They do have the money, because how much would that be, for the food? Only twice a year, the picnic and only two things, picnic and turkey dinner, okay? They do have the money, but the manager, they find his reason, I don't know the reason, the actual reason, to tell the head office that, oh, not too many people show up. Actually, every year, 25 people. They think it's not enough. They want maybe 35 people.
Community housing operators do recognize the value of social programming for tenants, but find it challenging to provide that within their constrained budget. Often, there are behind-the-scenes issues that can create a disconnection between residents and housing operators. However, according to the Brightside resident survey that SFU conducted, 74% of the residents perceive their management team as either somewhat or very approachable. We asked William about those concerns.
In a perfect world, we would find a partner who does something like this, and we would open up our building so that way they're not getting the support from their landlord. Because a lot of residents, and this is something I was quite ignorant of before I started working at Brightside, a lot of residents, they do not want this support or these activities from their landlord, and I respect that. So let me give you an example. Queen's University runs a program called Oasis that they've got in several buildings in several cities across the country. They were looking to move to the West Coast and open up their first Oasis buildings on the West Coast. They found Brightside. I'm very grateful for that. We hit it off. And so we've got 2 of our buildings. We've got this Oasis program going. Oasis program is resident driven. So it comes with a grant that allowed the Collingwood Neighborhood House to hire someone who comes into our buildings half-time. So they're in one building 2.5 days, another building 2.5 days. They can do health and wellness programs. They can do nutrition, fitness kind of programs. They can do nutrition programs. They can do social isolation programs. And often it's a combo. The problem is getting the financial support to do this in every building. We don't have that today. You could easily be a Brightside resident in a building and never have experienced any of this and not know that we're doing it and feel like you're socially isolated and there's nothing Brightside's doing about it. So I don't want to paint an overly rosy picture. There's a lot there that gives me hope, and there's some really good examples. And I'm pushing BC Housing and other organizations to try and come up with a fund to, again, it's not for Brightside. I'm not trying to grow Brightside, but to make sure that every resident in every one of our buildings can have access to something like this.
The residents we spoke to were clear that they had benefited from living in community housing in many ways. They also appreciated the effort of their housing operators to create affordable and stable homes. But at the same time, they shared some frustrations, which often stem from persistent and systematic challenges facing the sector. One of the frustrations for Pam is the lack of maintenance.
Laundry is common right around here, and this is area for our meetings, and people can get together. There's a rec room downstairs, but it's poorly kept. It's in terrible condition. Laundry, they use, you have no idea. It's a coin operated, and nobody maintains it other than once a week, the cleaners come in. This woman, she does what she can, but it's awful. They don't know how to use the machines. They're broken every other day, and I had to call Coinomatic people to come and fix it. If you call and machine is broken, say on Friday, then you get sometimes you don't get a response. Sometimes they say, okay, we'll be there on Monday. Lord, 2 days of no laundry. This is not right.
Pam's experience may represent 16% of community housing tenants who expressed dissatisfaction with their dwelling condition in the 2021 Canada Housing Survey. The old-age housing stock has led to the deterioration of building conditions and increasingly high maintenance costs. Nearly 40% of the community housing stock across Canada is in poor condition. The situation is most acute in Manitoba, where only 7% of the housing stock is rated as in good or excellent condition. In comparison, 61% in BC and one-third in Ontario. Fire hazards are one of the chief concerns when housing stock falls into disrepair. Rita worries about this.
Overall, I'm good. Overall. But one worry, because remember we have two fires. So I bought rental insurance, okay? Very cheap because of the group insurance and also for affordable housing and tenants. Very cheap, $150 for 1 year. A lot of coverage. They would, if I don't have a place to stay, I can stay in a motel maybe 5-6 months. Oh, wow. Okay, cover. And personal belongings, they cover. A lot of good coverage, okay? So I bought that for a few years already. And also I have lots of rope beside my bed. It goes to, because I live second floor, so I can climb down from my window, I can climb down to the garden, then I'm safe. So I'm prepared, okay? In case I cannot go to the back door. We have a back door, but I still have to go through 3 units to go to my back door. It's much easier if I go from the window, okay? But I tie all kinds of rope from my bed to the window. So I'm prepared. That is one big worry, okay? And overall, okay.
For older buildings, heat management can be a major concern. The 2021 Canada Housing Survey revealed that 22% of community housing residents were dissatisfied with the temperature control in their unit during the summers, and 16% were dissatisfied in the winters.
It's so hot. I have everything going. And they need to manage the environment, like, heat in my suite. It's burning. It's up to 27 degrees, I have to keep my window open and everything going. Air conditioning going when it's snowing outside is not right. Something is wrong.
The aging and deteriorating condition of community housing stock present a significant challenge for housing operators who strive to keep their units affordable. Marika elaborates on these constraints.
Nonprofit housing providers operate in very narrow margins. So they really have a budget agreement with BC Housing in particular that doesn't allow for a lot of wiggle room. So we saw a real limitation on resources for housing providers to be able to do things like a lot of maintenance. They weren't able to replace roofs as quickly as they needed to. Like they made some choices as well about how they need to redirect funds. So deferred maintenance is a major issue. And I think, and folks who are living in community housing right now are unfortunately feeling the effects of that, like decades long kind of deferred maintenance. Buildings don't just need like some interior paint now, they need to like replace a whole interior wall because there's been leaking for 10 years, right? So that deferred maintenance piece is a huge part of it. We've been doing some advocacy with BC Housing around that deferred maintenance piece. We're also seeing, so the community housing sector is just as much impacted by supply chain issues and the lack of access to appropriate labor that the private sector does. And so those kind of major kind of mechanical issues too, often there's just no one to fix the elevator. If they need a new elevator, all the paperwork and funding and all of those pieces to actually require the money to purchase that elevator is a huge issue and it takes forever. So because of all the regulations too around community housing providers, it also makes it more difficult for them to be able to react very quickly. And so we also see delays as a result of that. So they will have to sometimes go back to BC Housing and say, look, our elevator broke. We need $50,000, probably way more than that, but $50,000 to do the maintenance that we need on this. BC Housing goes, okay, well, we have to go up to the executive, and then we may have to go to the treasury board at the province. So it may take a while to get this. So those housing providers try and do the best that they can to support those tenants. But we're competing in a private sector market for services, but we're not private sector operators. So that can also be a huge challenge.
Another major concern shared amongst the guests we spoke to was that housing operators may not be equipped to meet their tenants' changing need for care or accommodate newly arising disabilities or health issues. Though, in some cases, nonprofit operators may be able to move tenants to another unit that suits their needs better.
Some people move from second floor or third floor to basement. Landlord, then they make arrangement.
That's really good.
In case one of the tenants move out, then they can move in. At least maybe 2 of them already do that, already there. Okay? Yeah, they can request, or they can request to move to another that has elevator. Oh, another thing, my neighbor who has good connection, he comfort me. Oh, don't worry, they will replace you to another location because it has about 15 locations in Vancouver, right? So that's why he comfort me.
In BC, residents in community housing can request a transfer to a different unit that their current housing provider also operates, or to be moved to a unit that's managed by another organization. This type of transfer can be facilitated through the BC Housing Registry if the request is considered to be for a legitimate reason, such as a medical need. But due to the same limited availability that we talked about earlier, this transfer system doesn't work for everyone and usually does not work quickly. Residents who live independently can still have complex needs, and often they have to manage those themselves. Pam, for example, finds herself in a dire situation with a health diagnostic that throws the suitability and security of her housing situation into doubt.
That's right. Not only that, I might not be able to function properly, as you say, because of my cancer. It's stage 4. And I'm thinking about it. I said, what's going to happen to me 2 or 3 years from now if I live that long? I probably will, but where am I going to go? Extended care? What do you call the other one where they go to the last palliative care? I have already planned that I want to be, instead of going to those options, I want dying with dignity, get an injection, go to sleep, that's it. I have already planned that. And it's based on, not that I don't like to live, it's based on security of my everyday living. Who's going to look after me? I don't want to be burdened on my family. I'm sort of like at the end of my rope thinking, where am I going to move? I was talking to this community development officer. I said, put me anywhere, any of your buildings. She says, we can't do that. And I don't know what I'm going to do. That's in terms of security. It's a big thing on my mind right now. So I don't know. We'll see.
We asked Pam whether it would be helpful if her landlord could connect her or refer her to resources for service and support.
Yes, but then I'm thinking it's not going to work here. No, I don't. They will refer me. They'll say, I was a social worker as well. I worked as a social worker. So they're going to refer me to say, this agency, call them, Pam, and that's not what I mean, a referral. That's not a referral. Referral means you start something and then you see it to the end. It's done. No, I got 211, I got 311, and I got all those 911 numbers, but that's it. How sterile these numbers are. Like they're dealing with almost emergencies. Nobody sees senior achieving what they want to achieve in their health care, accommodation, food. that kind of stuff.
Unfortunately, Pam's heartbreaking story isn't just an isolated incident. We asked William to explain the community housing landlord's perspective on the challenge. William said these kinds of challenges, where a senior is no longer able to live independently in community housing, but at the same time not able to access support that could allow them to make this work, are common.
One of the things that worries me is, you know, we have a lot of seniors in our buildings. Every year, those seniors age in place. And if it's a two-story walk-up and you're on the second floor of that building and you moved in when you were 72 and quite spry, and now you're 87 and stairs are becoming a challenge, we don't have a lot of capacity to get you, we don't have a lot of accessible units given the age of our stock. We don't have a lot of available units. And so I do worry about our residents' ability to age in place in those older buildings. I worry about an emergency in that building at night and everyone's rushing to get out and people have a variety of mobility issues in a two-story walk-up. That worries me. We're not supportive housing. So if we see a resident who's having health issues, we can talk to them. We can give them referrals to places they could go, but they don't have to do those things. And many don't want those referrals from their landlord. A lot of people have had really bad experiences with the power dynamic between landlords and residents, and they just want us to stay out of their affairs. And I respect that. But it means that people can deteriorate in front of our eyes, and there's really nothing we can do. If we're supportive housing, we would have a health team in house. We could provide them those services. So the gap is a person moves into a Brightside building, like I said earlier, at 72 years old, they're perfectly healthy. They've been living with us for 20 years. They're now 92. They may be in denial about their lack of abilities or their changing abilities. And their ability to live independently is coming to an end. There's no place for them to go that's inexpensive, that's deeply affordable, that's more like a care home or some kind of assisted living facility. And Brightside is no longer the right option for them. And in those cases, it's heartbreaking. So it is an ongoing struggle where at any given time there's a number of residents who are in distress and we do everything we can to help them. But ultimately, all we can do is kind of point them in certain directions. There's not much we can actually do for them. So subsidies would help us have more staff who could help point them those directions, connect with their social workers or a care team they have with Coastal Health or whoever that's with. But our ability to do that is quite limited, both in terms of being a landlord and in terms of we can't have extra positions on staff. Like we've got to break even with our own rent rolls. So it is an ongoing challenge of that, finding that balance.
These frustrations underscore fundamental systemic issues in the community housing sector. That is, there is a systematic disconnect between the housing and health authorities, exacerbated by the severe shortage of community housing, especially of supportive housing. In BC and in many other parts of Canada, community housing providers and assisted living operators are governed by two different government agencies. This means that when community housing providers encounter tenants who aren't able to live independently anymore, they typically refer them to assisted living or supportive housing. When spaces are available, they can access crucial care services, including regular housekeeping. But these spaces are severely undersupplied. And as Pam explains, they aren't always the preferred option for residents. Both William and Marika emphasized how challenging this situation can be for both residents and housing operators.
There's not a lot we can do because there isn't the continuum of care or continuum of housing options available in the variety and in the amount that we need and at the levels of affordability that we need. In a perfect world, what you just said is exactly what would happen, that we would see a resident struggling, we would refer them to someone at Coastal Health or certain services that are available in the community. The heartbreaking cases are cases where there's not a lot we can do because Brightside is no longer the most appropriate place for them to live, but there is no natural next place to go, or the health authority is so overwhelmed with people who are desperate. Our residents are housed. They actually don't intervene because they're overwhelmed, the health providers, and there's very little we can do for that other than continuing to advocate for them with the health authorities. But there comes a certain point where the health authorities are like, you're the landlord, you need to stay out of this. And they're not wrong from a legal point of view. So we find ourselves trying. When it works, we have great success with that. But it means all three, the health authority, let's say, the resident themselves and us, have to all be aligned. And that does happen. but there's heartbreaking cases where it doesn't happen for a variety of reasons, including the cognitive state of the resident, and that is heartbreaking.
We hear a lot from our seniors housing providers that some of the seniors that are living in their buildings just become less mobile. Their health is quickly declining. Some seniors have hoarding behaviors, and so that ends up being a challenge not only for that senior but also for their tenant, for their neighbors. So we're seeing this, and because we're also dealing with a population bubble, right? So the folks who are seniors who are in seniors housing right now are baby boomers, and they were a massive population, right? And so we're seeing a lot of those folks moving into seniors housing, and then also aging in there. And the volume of people is more than we've ever seen before in seniors housing. So the generation before the boomers, their parents, there was just not as many people. And so some of these challenges are being compounded in seniors independent housing because we just don't have the stock to address the population challenge, like just the number of people who need supports. So that is something that we're also seeing, that some folks are also staying in their units when, even if their family wants them to move out of their unit, because there's nowhere else for them to go. There's no other kind of more, there's more deeper, like assisted living that's affordable. A lot of assisted living is quite expensive, and it's run by private market operators. And so that transition, that, moving folks into housing that meets their needs is sometimes really difficult. But really, like, as our population shifts and the context shifts, our legislation and our policy environment really isn't keeping up.
At the end of our conversations, our guests shared their hope for the community housing sector. Speaking from a resident's perspective, this is what Pam had to say.
It has a potential. That's what people don't realize. Community living does have a potential to do wonderful things, but it's not being done, So for the existing condition, they can maintain buildings properly. And they should look at their clientele in those buildings properly, so-called residents. They should improve their service delivery, how they approach clients, residents, and how they meet their needs. Why can't they call up food bank and say once a month, every 2 weeks, deliver some boxes of fruit and vegetables and leave it here? Why can't they do that?
William and Marika shared their thoughts from the perspective of nonprofit housing professionals.
Well, ongoing subsidies is a must. Otherwise, we can't get to the level of affordability we need. So, ultimately the problem is, and I don't mean to sound overly cavalier, but when you have things like a necessity like housing, and it's being driven so much by a profit motive, it corrupts the whole system. We have to find a way of rebalancing the amount of profit being extracted from housing until everyone has a place to live. I don't have a problem with a profit motive in housing if there's an abundance of housing. But as long as we're at a deficit, we have to make sure, like, there's a right to housing in this country that is not being enforced on any meaningful level. So if a building comes up for sale, how do we have first right of refusal to get it into the nonprofit, co-op, indigenous housing sectors first? And if that doesn't work, then go to the market, as opposed to the other way around, which is we have no option to buy those properties. I think there's a bunch of policy things where we have to prioritize community housing in this country. We keep saying we're in a crisis. If my household is in a crisis, we're going to do a whole bunch of things differently to get out of that crisis.
I'd like to see, again, more broadly, housing within kind of government frameworks, policy frameworks, housing and health more connected. So we see a lot of investment in health research and we know that they're intricately linked. Housing is a determinant of health that's been well established. And so to actually have our policy frameworks address that and have health authorities actually see themselves as actors and have an important role in the housing sector, I think is really important. Something that we're wanting to focus on more in the coming years in our advocacy as well.
This will be it for today's episode. Thank you to all of our guests for speaking with us and sharing their stories. The stories you've just heard may make you question the potential and limits of community housing. That's what we'll discuss in our next episode. How far can community housing go to address the ongoing housing crisis? Stay tuned for that. But before you go, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning into Demystifying Community Housing, a special series from the Policy Options podcast. As we move through this work, exploring policy solutions to increase access to community housing across diverse geographies, it's important to recognize the ancestral territories that we're on. We're grateful for the opportunity to work on these lands. To our listeners, we encourage you to visit the website native-land.ca, where you can find out which Indigenous territory you're on and acknowledge that land's Indigenous heritage. The production of this podcast series was led by Yushu Ju and Meg Olden at Simon Fraser University as part of the Community Housing Canada project and the Housing Inequality in Canada project, and collaboration with the IRPP. This episode has been a dedicated collaboration with production assistance by myself, Ricardo Montrose, and Luc Moinson, and audio production by Jackie Gallant. If you like what you heard and would like to know more about the Institute for Research on Public Policy, head over to irpp.org. For additional resources and information recommended and referred to by our guest speakers, please be sure to check out our show notes and the episode description. This was Ricardo Montrose. Thank you for listening.